Hi everybody, thanks for being here today. I'm Terry Ryder, founder of Hotspotting. Welcome to today's special webinar event in which we're speaking about the research tools to find the next hotspot. And our guest presenter today is the ideal person, I think, to be discussing this topic, Wise Agent Kate Hill from Adviseable. Now, conducting thorough research to identify the best places to invest is critical at any point in time, but particularly so now when there's so much upheaval in property markets. And contrary to the impression often given by news media, we don't have a single national situation in terms of how well or how badly markets are dealing with the impacts of the pandemic. Some locations are struggling, obviously, but others are showing good resilience, and some are actually thriving in the current circumstances. It's important for investors to understand which ones present risks and which ones actually present opportunities right now. How do you tell one from the other? And how do you find the locations that will deliver outperformance long term? Today we're going to give you some answers to those key questions. And I think there's no one better in Australia to provide some of the essential clues on how to conduct the basic research to find the next hotspots than Kate Hill of Adviseable. So today Kate will be presenting, amongst other things, the Adviseable Area Top 10, the key criteria to investigate to make sure you're buying in the right place. Kate will also be presenting a special offer on services from Adviseable, so make sure you stay tuned as we work our way through the key issues. And if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box you should see in front of you, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions as possible over the next hour. So Kate Hill from Adviseable, welcome. How's it going?
Oh, hello, Terry. Good. Yes, as we were just saying, it's all business as usual, maybe not on quite the same level, but it's very much buyers and sellers are out there. People are keen to buy property. People are keen to sell property. I am like a coiled spring going to be talking about this today. It's obviously a topic that I certainly spend at least half my working life looking at, the areas that we're buying in. And obviously it's the core of what you do, Terry, which is why I think this matches so well. And thank you for your kind words. I think my biggest problem today is that we only have an hour. It's such a huge topic. And there is so much to think about, and it's obviously why people would use professionals such as you and myself, so that they don't have to do all this for themselves, because really it is a full-time job to do what we do, to research areas. So I'm just going to launch in, if that's all right, so I don't spend 10 minutes waffling in a preamble, and we'll just get right onto it, if that's all right.
By all means, do so.
Yes. And as Terry says, do type in your questions, because these are individually huge topics, as we go through the slides, etc. So just to try and make sure that everything's covered off on. So the usual disclaimer, everyone, that this is not personal information, does not constitute personal financial advice. Please look at this slide. It's everything that we talk about here is very general in nature, so you need to always make sure that this stuff is relevant for you personally. And who we are, for those of you who may not know us, we are independent property investment advisors, we are buyers agents, development consultants, and our mission always is to buy you the best available property, not just investment property. We buy owner-occupied property as well, but this really is specifically about investment property, this webinar, in the best available growth area. And we do that in a very supportive and independent and personal client-first approach. We have been doing this for many, 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 many years. We love what we do, and we've purchased hundreds of properties for our clients. Our main focus during this time recently has been Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, New South Wales. We are members of PIPA, the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, REBA, the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association, and also the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. So all our advisors are QPIA qualified, that is a qualified property investment advisor, and this is really, really important. So what we stand for, like I've just alluded to quickly, is that client-first approach. We always assess the client's need first, their goals, their risk, what's right for you. it's crucial that we start with that. This is not a cookie cutter approach. We then look at the areas, which one is best for you. There are lots and lots of really good growth areas out there, but which one is best for you? We make that decision together with you. And then we go and find the property. So finding that right property for the area and for you, all of these things are equally important in our process as we go through that. So we don't just sort of sweep into an area, buy all the properties and assume that those are all going to be right for all of our clients. We don't do that. It's tailored for your personal needs and your strategy. So that's us. Now, obviously, a huge part of that, as we've just said, is the area decision. And what we're going to cover off on during this webinar is why area research and selection is one of the, if not the, but one of the most crucial aspects of property investment. Now, this might sound really obvious, but it's actually more than just about finding a growth area. How does this area research tie in with mitigating investment risk? I'm going to cover off a little bit on that. Our 10 critical considerations when researching an area for property investment purposes. There are a number of items on our checklist, so to speak, that make sure all aspects that need to be considered when you're doing this research and finding good areas are covered off on. And we've chosen these specifically. And then some of the resources available to help property investors with that area research. So why is area research important? So you might find a really, really great area, but the in-demand property type just doesn't match your price point, for example. It doesn't match what you can afford, and it doesn't match your cash flow needs. So you really need to assess those things again, obviously. It might not match your risk profile. So it could be an area with, for example, just really old properties that you're not comfortable with, or it has the wrong demographic. It's really, really important that you know what it is that you need. The areas are very well, but what do you need?
You've referred already a couple of times to risk and risk profile. Do you find that the average customer actually knows what a risk profile is and what their risk profile is? I'd imagine not.
No. Look, sometimes people will have a bit of an idea when it comes to the actual property type. They'll say, I don't want anything too old, or I just want something new that I don't have to worry about. They might say, actually, I don't mind something that's a bit older as long as it's a solidly built property. So they might have a vision, if you like, in their head of what that property type might be and what they're comfortable holding, but then how that might translate into cash flow is quite a different thing. So they might say to me, yep, I'm okay with an older property. But then when you look at the cash flow and that outcome, it's not quite what they're looking for. They're comfortable holding. So no, it's not always fully considered. No. That's why
and it's so important, isn't it, for people to understand that?
Crucial, because you need to be able to hold this asset for long enough for it to perform for you. And if you can't afford it, you're not going to be able to do that. And then you're going to sit there and think property doesn't work, but it does. You've just got to find the right property type for you in a really good growth area, right? So the performance indication, so does that area have all of the drivers necessary? So this is quite simple, right? If you buy in a dud area, it just won't grow. And you've wasted an opportunity, and the buying and selling costs are quite high, as we all know. Getting in and out of property is not cheap. And as I've just said, you need to give it time to grow and perform for you. Solid research will ensure that your property will grow during the time that you own it. It won't eliminate risk, but it certainly will mitigate it. Getting maximum bang for your buck. Now, growth depends on supply and demand, right? This is fairly straightforward. But you must buy the right property type for the area that is chosen. If you buy what everyone wants, you'll be fine. But if you buy something that nobody wants or very few people want, then you're kind of stuck with a bit of a lemon that no one's going to rent and no one's going to want to buy if you have to sell it. And I see this mistake happen quite a lot. Mitigating liquidity and vacancy risk. So again, this ties in with the above. If you buy the in-demand property type, then you'll always have a tenant. You know, you'll have much more of a chance of always having a tenant, and you can sell it more easily if you want or you need to. And again, this is often not considered properly. You know, we don't always want to sell property, but you know, if something happens and you need to sell it, you need to be able to do that quickly. And if you haven't bought the right property type, it's going to take longer, right? It's common sense, but people don't think this through.
Kate, is it the case that the prevailing property type, the type that's most in demand, will actually differ quite often from one area to the next?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm going to come back to that. Definitely. The X factor. So the property must-haves for a local area. And as Terry just says, these can vary hugely from state to state, but also from city to city. There are always things that the stats and the magazines don't tell you. So it's local know-how as to what the property must have to meet the demands of the local people who live there. You can't assume that living here, wherever it is you are, buying somewhere else, that everyone's going to be the same as you. Fabulous though you probably are. We're all different. We all have different needs, and living in a different area is likely to require different things in a property. So, and you've got to find things out like where the busy roads are, the good schools, the bad neighborhoods. That's not necessarily the wrong investment choice, of course, but you can buy the right property type in a great overall area and still end up with a lemon because, you know, it's just not in quite the right spot. And it'll be hard to rent out and hard to sell because it's in the wrong suburb within your area or the wrong side of the street, and it doesn't have the right layout for the local demand. Just things like this, right? So these are just some of those things of why we conduct that area research. So how is area risk search? How area research is part of your risk mitigating strategy? So obviously, when we talk about insurance, we mean personal insurances that are critical. But in terms of that area research, you need to know, for example, whether you need to have flood insurance. Does that area flood? Are there bushfire risks? What level of contents insurance do you have? Now, some landlord policies have an inbuilt level of contents insurance, but is it enough for the area that you're buying in? Do you need more? And this is the sleep at night factor. You know, it's one of the biggest things out there. So always talk to your insurance broker about this. Diversification, obviously. The area is important so that you can diversify your portfolio, not be exposed to the same risks across the properties in your portfolio. If you buy 3 properties next to each other, they'll all be exposed to the same economic risk, the same vacancy periods, the same weather, you know, all this sort of stuff. So area research means you can diversify into other areas so that you diversify your portfolio. Cash flow. How important is this? Your area research needs to tell you what the likely cash flow of your property is going to be. Now, this can help you make more informed decisions and buy in an area that's appropriate for you. We're always talking about growth areas here, but there are different yields in different areas, and some will be appropriate for you and some might not. So again, you don't want to be stuck with something that you can't afford. That's part of your area research. Liquidity. As I've said before, you need to be able to sell it quickly if you need to. If something happens, you need to be able to get rid of it, and you need access to cash again if something happens. Having the right cash flow for you will help build cash buffers. It will help deal with any unforeseen circumstances. So research, we covered this a little bit on that previous slide, but buying the right area for you and the right property for you will help prevent having no growth. So you should get some growth and also those vacancies. So your area research is a massive part of your risk mitigation strategy. It's critical, all of this, right? Okay. The area top 10. So it is basically, like it says here, the blueprint of our in-house area research reports that we provide to our clients. And in turn, it's the basis for our area, and then property recommendations with the clients that we're buying for. So we provide this research to our clients before we determine purchase area. Terry Ryder hotspotting reports, which I'm going to come back to time and time again, are an invaluable resource for us when we do that research, just, you know, the quality of the information that you provide. These reports for us, they comprise of what we consider to be the 10 essential property investment factors, and that's based on professional perspective and experience. It provides a key analysis of key capital growth drivers within an area and determines the ideal property type, the attributes and the position within each respective area. So before we really get into this, important things to remember for me is that you can't, how do I put this? You can't have an ego when you're doing this, right? You need to stay alert. If you're doing this research yourself, you need to stay alert. You need to be humble, which sounds a bit odd, and be prepared to learn and be wrong and start again. You're going to spend time, maybe some money and energy on area research. You're going to want to, and I found this in my earlier days, you're going to want to like the areas that you're researching. You're going to want to have something to show for your efforts. Don't ignore the stats. If you've come across, you know, you've done half a day's work and you come across and it's just not working out, you know, don't just stop, leave, go to another area. Don't persist with areas that aren't, that just aren't ticking the boxes for you. And as I've alluded to already, don't make assumptions about people, of what people in one area want and need is going to be the same as what people in another area want and need. And it is not going to necessarily be the same as you. As I said, as fabulous as we all are, you know, you go to a different area, they're going to have completely different needs. Some basic needs are the same, of course, but they, in terms of that property type, often that's related to climate, you know, the sort of the demographic that there is there. You need to just put all your own assumptions aside and just look at that local area and what is going on there, right?
Kate, one of the questions questions are coming through, and one from Phil seems pertinent to what you're talking about. He's asking how long is research good before it's out of date? So how current do the numbers need to be? It's not a bad question because it's
a great question. Yeah. Look, I'd say we update our reports probably every 6 months or so. It kind of depends what's going on in an area, which, sorry, I know that sounds a bit vague, but because we are buying in multiple states, I do tend to know what's going on somewhere. And if I get a sense that an area is on the move, if you like, then I'll know that those stats need updating. But I would say, things, basic things like a big infrastructure project, they take years to build sometimes. You know, the councils plan years in ahead. Population stats, they tend not to change hugely from year to year. Unemployment rates, and obviously especially in this situation that we're in, they can change quite dramatically. So it will depend on the stat, and it will depend on what's going on in that particular area. But Terry, you bring your reports out fairly regularly, obviously.
Yeah. So, we update all our location reports and top 5 hotspots reports every 4 months.
Yeah.
Now, if you consider the last 12 to 18 months, beginning of last year, we had many markets stalled because of a federal election coming up, lots of negativity.
Yeah.
Then we had a series of fortunate events, including interest rate cuts and decisions by APRA. And so the second half of last year was quite, generally speaking, things were rising. Coming into this year, things looked pretty bullish, and then COVID struck. So we had a whole new set of circumstances. So things can change. The macro stuff can change quite significantly, but it doesn't change the underlying fundamentals of a location.
It really doesn't. And you're looking at long-term stats as well, right? So just because, something might have happened in an area in the past month, that doesn't, like you say, that doesn't change the fundamental growth drivers that are good of an area that's been performing really well and going in the right direction for the past 5 or 10 years, and the council are very proactive, and there's all sorts of things going on there. Just because there's a tendency at the moment to watch stats to watch, you know, percentages and interest rates and vacancy rates and, oh God, you know, auction clearance rates, you know, every 5 minutes. It's not conducive really, I think, to, and I don't think it's that meaningful is what I'm trying to say. I don't think it's that meaningful when you're looking at an area that, and a property in an area that hopefully you're going to hold for the next 15, 20 years, right? The last, you know, the auction clearance rates on last Saturday really, you know, aren't going to, they should not be affecting your decision to buy in a really good, solid area. So did I answer that question?
I think you did, yes.
Okay. So my last note on this before we actually start on those actual categories is that anyone buying property for you out there, or advising you on areas, they should be giving you at least this level of research that we are talking about here, okay? I've seen clients that have come to me that have got a lovely glossy folder. It's got a one-page, A4 page with a few things on there in terms of area, and then beautiful properties off the plan or brand new, etc., for sale. This is not advice. They are selling you a property. It's a token gesture. It's not been tailored for you. Please be very, very careful when somebody is simply selling you property and not providing you with an actual in-depth area research report that shows and proves why this area is good for you. Okay, it's hugely important. There's a massive difference there. Okay, lesson over with. Right, first one, location and general area overview, as I would call it. So we're looking at, quite simply, just a map of the area. Where are we looking? A list of the suburbs. Where is it within the country, within the state? What are the outlining borders of the suburbs and that local authority? The list of suburbs. Is it a city itself? Is there a distance between where you're looking and a CBD? Distance to CBD in itself is not a growth driver. I've got to stress this right from the start, right? Just some local highlights, which can be how many people in general are living in this area, the median property price, the median rent, things like a vacancy rate. You want to be looking at these things just in general to start with, to see, as I say, whether you can afford this area. And you can do some very basic median or some yield calcs if you look at a median property price and a median rent and a vacancy rate. They're very general. We're not sort of saying yes or no at the moment, but this is kind of just as we're getting a feel for the area. Terry?
The point you make about distance to the CBD, and just coincidentally, there's a question that's come through from one of our listeners. Does distance to the CBD matter, given that people are working from home and more will be doing so? My view on that is that there are more important things to be close to than a CBD.
Definitely.
And there's a bit of a fallacy that the CBD is the big jobs nodes and everyone works there. In actual fact, while it is a big job node, in most cities it's not the biggest.
No.
And there are more important jobs nodes than the CBD.
Yes.
And I think the point I'm making also that the more people understand the ability and the benefits of working from home, the less important that's going to become. How do you feel about it, Kate?
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree with you. I think people, they want more than, they don't want the commute. I mean, even if we're talking about our big cities, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, etc., Adelaide, our capital cities, I guess. There really aren't that, when you look at the stats, there aren't that many people in terms of the percentage of people who work in a CBD. Like you say, those bigger job nodes are very much middle, sometimes even outer suburbs. So the distance to the CBD to me is, I've honestly never thought of it as something that is in itself a growth driver. Never.
But what I do find, and you may find this as well, that many investors and wannabe investors are quite fixated on the concept of proximity to the CBD. Yeah. I think it's one of those very old myths and misconceptions that still pervade in real estate. And I think people just need to completely let go of this notion
I know, I agree. Also that they, well, I guess they think that because they think they're going to have superior capital growth in those areas, right? And it's just not the case. I think it can actually be the reverse. Again, it depends on the size of the city, but if we're talking about our capital cities, there are fewer people that live close to the CBD and many, many more people that live in that middle to outer ring of the CBDs. And I always say that you need to aim for, your target market is the masses, not the 4 people who live close to the CBD, but the hundreds and thousands that live outside. That's, you know, that's where the activity is. That's where people are buying and selling property, not in the middle. So,
okay, we do have the ability today when people raise their hand to actually unmute them and actually take a question, have a brief discussion with people who are out there watching and listening. And Kathy Graffiti right now has her hand raised. You happy to take a question live around about now? If Katie, who's in the background pulling the levers, can make that happen. I'm not. Sometimes it takes.
Oh, hello.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I've never done this before.
Well, you're doing well.
Is that you, Kathy?
On the Zoom, I'm into real estate, but I've never done Zoom. So what I wanted to, I'm curious about this closeness or proximity to the CBDs. Are we talking about just the capital cities, or are we talking about places like big cities like Campbelltown and?
No, I'm mainly talking about your Sydney CBD, Melbourne CBD, capital city CBDs of the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people city CBD. If you're looking at a more localized CBD, that's different.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Do you have any other questions while we have you there?
Might have gone.
Okay.
Right. I'm going to crack on here so that if that's all right.
Sure.
So we are, when we're looking at this, and this perhaps will clarify this a bit more as well, people just need to be able to access services and amenities that keep money and the finances within that economy, within that micro economy. I think that's really important, right? So if the area is, say, too rural, there is often risk attached because people can't access all the amenities that they want. They've got to travel to go to where they want to spend their money. And it's not so in demand at that level, and the industries aren't as diverse, right? People need to want to stay in that area, have their families, make a life there. You're really just getting at this stage that general vibe of the area. It really just forms part of assessing whether an area stays on your list of places to consider. And we'll go into these highlights obviously a little bit more as we go through this, right? Again, anyone who has bought one will know that Terry's hotspotting reports are just such an awesome resource for this. So I'm not just saying this, I wouldn't be here if they weren't. But you know, you give such a great highlight, Terry, you know, right at the start. You this exactly what you do, the highlights, you know, the key points of an area that I think is they give this overview exceptionally well.
And for people who are a little bit concerned about the current circumstances and the impacts it's having, I think that right now vacancy rate has become more important. It's a wonderful indicator of just how well an area is coping with the forces of the pandemic. Some locations, particularly our CBDs, like the Sydney CBD, the Brisbane CBD, had a blowout in their vacancies because lots of investors had apartments that were Airbnb, and suddenly that's not working, so they've dumped it into a pool. Surfers Paradise on the Gold Coast has had a big blowout in vacancies, but the Sunshine Coast vacancies haven't risen at all. And in many of the best locations that you and I would probably recommend, there's been really no change in vacancy rates.
No.
I think
I've got a slide on that a bit later too.
Okay.
So it will show a stat. So, okay. Second is infrastructure. So we are looking at what are established and completed infrastructure projects and what are the proposed and under construction infrastructure projects. all part of your area research. Remember, this is the crucial thing that we're talking about, right? So we are looking for projects that cater for and plan for growing population. So the presence of established and good infrastructure is just that key requisite to ensure that the area is fit to thrive right now, right? That you've got the basics there. Like I said before, you've got the amenities, you've got facilities there, you've got schools, hospitals, roads, transport, shopping, lifestyle, to a degree that people want to live there. The other lead indicator then is suggesting that an area has potential is that evidence of future spending on additional infrastructure projects because of the anticipated population growth. So knowing that something is being built, is going to be built, it really can provide you with that window of opportunity for property investment in the area before the completion of the infrastructure project, and kind of neighbouring property values are pushed up. So if you discover these major projects for an area, it's always a good indicator that things are going to happen. It means the population is set to grow. The council has taken this into consideration. They've approved it. They're planning for it. I honestly don't think that there is too much information when it comes to this topic or this category. Again, we're talking about sort of major projects, things like more schools, hospital expansions. That's a good one because they're also massive employers in an area. New roads, transports, shopping, lifestyle centres are nice, absolutely. But, you know, there's a big difference between, I always remember an example where I was looking at an area and they were improving the local sewage plant and building a art gallery, which is all very lovely, but you know, it's not a hospital expansion. It's not building new roads. There's, you know, those are the things that you're looking for. They provide jobs, they make places. Those are the facilities in it and the amenities that people want. That's what we're looking for. And again, Terry, you do these wonderful sort of charts. You break them down into categories in terms of, you know, commercial and lifestyle, transport, health, education, of what's being planned and what's being proposed and what's actually been approved and is going ahead in the area. So when you think about, I'm thinking specifically, it keeps popping back into my head a few years ago when we knew that the Moreton Bay Rail extension line was being built from, you know, and it veered off from Petrie and now goes all the way around to Kippering. That was huge for that area. It was such a big project. Looking at the hospital expansions that there were in, or that's I think it's finished now, but in Bendigo, again planning for that growing population.
Yeah. And the other factor with infrastructure, Kate, is not only does it improve the amenity of an area, make it more accessible if it's transport, but it does generate economic activity and jobs, and that's a huge impact. I tend to think in simple terms that the reason why Sydney and Melbourne had its boom and say Brisbane didn't is Sydney and Melbourne were spending massively on infrastructure, tens of billions of dollars worth. It was generating so much economic activity and jobs, and Brisbane didn't have that, although it's now starting to change. I think it's a huge factor.
Yeah. So again, I'm thinking, you know, the city of Marion, which we both love, you know, that Tonsley precinct and what they're doing there is it's phenomenal. You know, out Western Sydney way, the billions that are being spent out there with not just the airport, but around that airport.
And what's happening out in Western Sydney makes proximity to the Sydney CBD completely irrelevant.
I know.
It's the Western Sydney in its own right is the third biggest economy in Australia, and proximity to the jobs node that will spring up around the new Badgerys Creek Airport is going to be probably far more significant than the Sydney CBD.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing I was just going to quickly say, sorry, I forgot to say this at the beginning. There's a slide at the end where I've got some websites listed that will help with the research into all this, guys, as well. So stick around. Category number 3, industry. So what I mean by that is that you need to ensure that there are enough diverse businesses in that area, in that town, and that people are working locally, so that there are fewer transient people. Like I said, they need to spend their money in and around where they live. If there aren't any businesses or enough businesses in town, again, people are going to be traveling to work, they're more itinerant. It's more secure if those businesses are in town. It's great for that lifestyle, you know, the work-life balance, so that people don't spend half their lives sitting in the car commuting. And again, you're spending your money there, the economy thrives. Diversity is important to ensure that your area is not dependent on one single industry. Again, it's common sense, right? Or in fact, that all the other industries that might look like they're diverse are actually only there to support that one local industry. Tourism is a big one for this. So make sure that there is enough diversity when it comes to industries, so that people don't have to move, the whole economy doesn't collapse when that one single industry, or if that one single industry fails. Now, this typically can be tourism, mining, agriculture. Mining, obvious, you know, we've all heard the horror stories from some of those Queensland towns. Agriculture is the same one. You know, when there's drought, there's floods, you need other things going on in those areas for people to make a living. Tourism, right now, perfect example of how some of those areas, and like Terry alluded to earlier on, and certainly in terms of vacancy rates, of how those areas that are reliant on tourism are struggling because there is no tourism. We're not allowed to go anywhere, right? But where you've got areas where there is health, there's education, there's construction, there's manufacturing, there's also tourism and agriculture and other things. Diversity of industry, I can't stress enough how important this is. It's a crucial one of those risk mitigators to ensure that the people that are living there have enough work and that they can make a living in enough different industries, so that you've got a good spread around what they're doing. And tourism, and again, be careful. Like I say, tourism is a tricky one, because sometimes it looks like there's diverse industries, but tourism, then you've got accommodation and retail and you know, cafes and restaurants, but they all support that one major industry. And when that's struggling, all the others do as well. So that's a critical one that we look for as well. Sorry, I forgot to put that one. So you're looking for established local industries. You know, where are people working? What kind of jobs do they have? Terry, anything else to add to that one?
No, I think you've covered it well. The proximity to employment hubs, and emphasising, we're not talking about the CBD, we're talking about other suburban employment hubs. Very important, because the research shows time and time again that one of the biggest factors that decides where people choose to live is proximity to where they work. And most people don't work in the CBD.
They don't. And again, it's, you know, it's also good to look for a diversity of, you know, within those industries, but look at a breakdown of employment by sort of profession, you know, and it's I hate this expression, but I'm going to use it. I can't help myself. You want that good mix of blue and white collar workers as well. Again, it just ensures, you know, that you've got people doing different things, different industries, different professions. It future-proofs you more than if you don't have that, right? So look for those diverse industries. So typically the Gold Coast, sorry, it's a favorite example, you know, will always struggle when the tourism industry struggles, because there is very little else out there on the main drag. The Sunshine Coast, however, and I know I've said this many times before, overcame that. You know, it's a shining example of how things can turn around, where of course you do still have tourism, but the university, that hospital complex at Bertinia is the biggest thing in the Southern Hemisphere, practically, I believe. You know, the police training college, there is so much else going on there that area is no longer reliant on the tourism industry. So, love it. Right, closely tied to industry is the economy, obviously. So, good economic health of an area is crucial for it to sustain growth. You've got to measure economic indicators such as, like I'm going through here, unemployment rate, jobs growth, median income growth. We consider all of these indicators, your household income levels, changes in median household levels, income levels, gross regional product, jobs growth, housing starts. All these things are necessary to assess the affluence and the growing affluence of an area. You want to check that the council is actively seeking to foster and encourage growth in an area. I come across sometimes what I think look like great areas, and you've got a council that is very kind of stuck in the mud and no, change is bad. We want things the way we are. We don't want all this young folk coming in here, creating vibrancy. It does happen, so you also, of course, need to check all these stats, but you need to compare them with something, right? So it's all very well sort of having them and knowing what they are, but knowing what they mean is another thing. So you need to compare them. If you've got a gross regional product, you want to compare it with your gross state product, a gross domestic product, so that you've got a comparison. How well is that area doing compared with other areas? It's, it needs to get the thumbs up to a lot of this stuff, right? So you can check things like a local chamber of commerce, things like low commercial vacancy rates are a good little indicator. The number of applications that are in council for new industrial and retail developments. Things like, it depends how far you want to go with this really, but checking the yellow pages for, the number of local businesses. And again, that diversity of businesses. So economic vibrancy comes with a forward moving community. And again, you want that balance. You need a balance between owners and renters, right? So ownership shows capacity for long-term growth, but not too much, because otherwise nobody will rent, right? You're checking things like the average time that a tenant stays in an area. And when an area is economically vibrant, people stick around because there's jobs, right? They can support their families. Unemployment rates. Now, this is always a favorite. People get a little bit hung up about this. Just because an area has a higher unemployment rate than perhaps the national average does not make it a bad investment opportunity. And again, Western Sydney is a great example for that. Typically the unemployment rates out there have been, I'm pointing out the window, have been maybe 2% or so higher than the national average. It doesn't stop capital growth in your property. So don't get too hung up on that. What else? Things like your local Bunnings, your Aldi, your Coles, Costco's, Ikeas, where are they setting up shop? They do their research. I think that's always a good thing to look at. There's another point I want to make, in that you can have an area that is economically quite vibrant and yet be not diverse in terms of industries, right? And vice versa. You can have an area that has good diversity of industry, but is economically stagnant. So you need both of these, number 3, industry, number 4, the economy, they both need to tick those boxes, okay? So just because you see a low unemployment rate, good jobs growth, high median income, does not mean the area has lots of different industries, is diverse in terms of its industries. It's a common mistake, right? So watch out for that. I feel like I need to stampede ahead here. Number 5, population and demographics. So what are we looking for here? There are 2 things that you need to understand when it comes to population and demographic mix. So how many people live here and who lives here? Both hugely important, right? So you need to assess population and demographic trends. This can provide that insight into anticipated property demand. So knowledge of those population figures will allow you to target areas with strong rising population, which again can offer a decreased investment risk, because there's a greater pool of prospective tenants and future buyers, right? Critical also to understand, as I say, who lives here. It's crucial that you understand this, because these are the people that you're buying for. They're going to rent this property off you and buy it off you if you need to sell it. So who are these people? Who are you buying for? What type of property is in demand by the local population, so that you're buying that most in-demand property type? Know who you're buying for and what they want. And again, come back to slide number 3, whatever it is, don't make assumptions that they want the same things that you do. You need to do that local research. It might not be the same as you. That property type might need completely different things to what you're used to, right? So in terms of the stats that you're looking at, obviously population, the current and the projected growth, then that breakdown of the demographics, the occupations, what do people do for a living? And think about how this relates to the type of property that you're buying. How old are they, right? And how does this relate to the property type that you're buying? There is a big difference between the needs of a young family and an older couple. So who lives here? The household type, like I've just said, the family types, and the lone parent with kids might have different needs. So who's the main, that main statistic? Who are the main types of people who are living here? Tenure and property type, are there enough people renting? That's crucial, right? There obviously has to be demand. And in terms of that property type, is it 3 beds, 2 beds? Is it a unit? Is it a house? Does it need parking? How much parking? How many cars do they have? And the commute. Again, I get this sometimes from people who are from our bigger cities. How are people getting to and from work? It's important because, again, it depends on the property type that you're buying and where do you need to buy it. And I do find that all of us from Sydney, we tend to obsess a little bit about having a property close to the train station. But if you are in an area where that is less important, you don't need to buy close to a train station. You know, there's areas out there that have trains, but nobody catches them because they're quite slow. It takes them longer to get the train into town or to wherever they're working than it is to drive. Everybody drives, right? So you need to know that demographic mix. It's crucial that you know all this. Really get to the nitty-gritty of who it is that you're buying for in this area. Right? It will minimize your vacancy and you'll be able to sell it quicker. Obviously, common sense when you're appealing to the masses. I'm going to pause for breath, Terry.
Don't pause for too long.
Don't pause for too long. Stampede.
Okay. We're 50 minutes into the broadcast and we're up to point number 6.
I know, right? So, assessing surrounds. I did tell you the hour. I know, I've got a lot to say for myself for this. Okay, so we are keeping in mind further things for increased tenant appeal for resale prospects as and when that might happen, right? So things like public transport, as I've just discussed. How are people getting about? And again, you might come from Sydney or Melbourne, you obsess about being close to a train station. Don't obsess about it. Find out whether it's necessary, right? Find out from the locals. If it is, fine. If it's not, don't obsess about it. Just find that great area where everybody wants to live. Shopping and recreation facilities, obviously school, childcare centres, self-explanatory. Are there bushfire overlays? Some areas, you know, it's a factor. Flooding, find out if the area floods. If so, where? Does it put you off completely? It might have flooding overlay, but again, local insight will tell you that, you know, an area actually hasn't flooded in the past 50 years. Again, it comes back to mitigation strategy as to whether you need insurance on that place, zoning and other overlays. So zoning, obviously the purpose for zoning, as we all know, is to allow the local national authorities to regulate, control land. Okay, you need to make sure that you know what zone you're in. Is anything being planned? Can make or break it. You know, you can do a great thing if you buy it where zoning changes are being planned. No other overlays. These can impact future growth potential massively, like things like mining subsidence overlays, heritage overlays, noise. Is there a new airport coming? you know, those things are really important, and the local people do tend to know that stuff, right? So drilling down a little bit more when you're assessing the surroundings, supply and demand, when we come to sales. Okay, so I've alluded to this before, the breakdown of homeowners versus renters. So you need a good balance there. You need homeowners at a certain percentage, renters to a certain percentage. We like a kind of ish, as a rough guide, 70-30 kind of percentage. To increase the probability of maximum return on your investment, minimize risk, your property has got to obviously remain in high demand. You've got to buy in an area that has an adequate level of renter demand. Okay, owner occupiers will often drive up the value. They ultimately drive up the value, but check that it isn't all renters and a transient community in that particular area. Okay, you're analysing breakdown of the property type, like we've just said. Find out the property type that's most in demand, the price segmentation. So what price point is the most common and the most popular? Average time on market will tell you exactly how vibrant and active a market is. Local knowledge is very important here. Don't assume that 30 days on the market is slow. You know, that could be quite quick in some areas. You know, find out what's normal, if you like, for that particular area. The sales trends, obviously look at sales growth charts, analyze the kind of median house price movements. You need to analyze your market from a competition standpoint. So the pool of comparable dwellings within the local rental and resale markets, and gauge the supply of new housing that's coming in that respective area to make sure that there isn't an oversupply imminent. You know, that's really important, that you're not buying something that's right next to a development with an older property, say, right next to a development with 5,000 new homes coming. So you need to assess that, right? Housing starts, you know, again, that's interesting because that will tell you about those new housing developments. You want obviously a level of development. Council does need to cater for a growing population, okay? But all these stats will give you a picture of where that area is at, you know, and a dropping level, or a slightly correcting median house price isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? I'd say that one, like the ones we had in Sydney a couple of years ago, where everything shot up, that's important. You don't want to buy right at the top of the market, right? But all of these categories that we're looking at will give you an overall picture of what's going to be happening in the area that you're looking in, right? Closely related to that of what we were just talking about is your supply and demand. When it comes to rentals, again, the breakdown of homeowners versus renters. I'm going to show you a slide next. It comes back to what Terry and I were talking about right at the beginning. You need to be able to rent it out. There has to be enough demand for your property to be able to rent that out. In some areas, you see stats where it is 85% owner occupiers and 15% renters for whatever reason, right? So your tenant pool there is quite small. So again, we like a 70-30-ish. It's not always that black and white, of course. Again, you're looking at the breakdown of property type. What is the likely rent for the property that you're buying? You must know this, right? And again, aim for the masses, not the 4% of people who can afford that really, really high rent. You're looking at the masses, appeal to the masses so that you minimize your risk of vacancies. Current vacancy rates and vacancy trends. What is the current vacancy rate? Again, is obviously important. Ideally, it's not above 3%, so you're not vacant for too long. But look at what the trends are showing for this. Is there a high and a low vacancy rate, and is that seasonal? And it might, when you look at the charts, you should be able to see that there's a trend, right? Often the vacancy rates are a little bit higher that December, January period, summer holidays. That's typically what we see. And the rental trends, again, how have the prices, have they grown, have they shrunk? Where is that property at in its rental cycle? Often what you'll find is that the rents are, if the rents have just grown because an area is, because there's more people coming into an area and renting property, they often do that. They often rent before they buy. It can be a sign of imminent capital growth when you've just seen a little rent growth chart. And I'm going to show you this slide. This is what Terry and I were talking about earlier on. Quite by coincidence, I've picked Sydney. This is actually the, sorry, it's not a vacancy chart. It's that breakdown of owner, occupiers and renters in Sydney CBD. Actually, so this is in the city of Sydney and Sydney CBD itself. So you'll see the white little circle around the number of people renting here. It is 56.5% of people that are renting in this area. That is very high. That is a transient, what we would call a transient population. Terry.
Yes, and right now the vacancy rate is around 10%. There are all sorts of reasons why you might want to avoid an area like this. It's kind of like Surface Paradise high-rise. Probably the worst location to be an investor amongst the iconic locations of Australia. People think it's a great place to buy. It's quite curious.
No, it's not. Exactly, and as we've just said, because the industries they're not diverse. There's not a growing population of kind of normal people, of families, and very transient population. And this is why when you see that level of people renting, it's a volatile area. All right. Okay. Very quickly, the yield and cash flow. So all of these things that we're looking at, market value, it's obvious, right, why this is important. You need to look at actual, I could talk about this for an hour just by itself, get the actual recent sales in the area, auction results, see what properties have actually sold for, check the benchmarks in the area so that you are not overpaying for that property. It's all part of your area research. Your purchase costs in that area, these will vary state to state. So make sure that you research that you know that your stamp duty in Victoria is going to be more than it is in New South Wales, right? Rental yields, obviously, again, important basic benchmarks to whether you can afford this particular area that you're researching. Remember that yield and cash flow are quite different. But if you're looking in an area that has older properties and it's got a 3% yield and you need a positive cash flow, stop right there, move on to a different area. It is not going to work for you, right? That can save you a lot of time. Annual expenses. Again, we're talking about your area research here. Find out what your likely annual expenses are going to be. These can vary state to state. Your property manager fees are different in every state. You're going to pay a lot more in South Australia and in WA than you are going to pay in Sydney CBD. You cannot compare your property manager fees in Brisbane with those in Adelaide. They're different for different reasons, right? But you need to know this. Know what you're getting into there. So what else? Council rates will differ. For example, in Townsville, your insurance and your council rates are very high. In Geelong, they're going to be different. So do you need to have an annual pest inspection? Look at those costs. It's all part of your area research so you can work out whether this will work for you, okay? Depreciation, again, just know that, the age of the property, so that you know whether you've got any on-paper losses. And finally, what we call the word on the street. This is all that stuff that the stats aren't really going to tell you, okay? It's local knowledge, the no-go zones, areas to stay away from and why. Find out why. What's the X factor that your property needs? Only local research will tell you this. There's always something, again, like those, the good school that everyone wants to get their kids into. A really good micro location and why. Does the yard need to be facing a certain way? What do the properties that you're buying in this area need to have to cater for that local population? This, honestly, this can more than future-proof you from downturns and periods of higher vacancies by just having those basic things that people want. Find out what the next big thing is. Is there an up and coming area that everyone's talking about? Maybe a new employer coming into town, and talk to the locals about those rental market trends. Where does everybody want to, where's everybody renting? You know, again, it's local knowledge that you're not going to read in those magazines, right? Very quickly, my summary: diligent area research. It's the foundation for determining the compatibility of an area and its capital growth potential for you. So this area research, it's just so important. Recognize the risks of not asking these key questions, and it relates to resale and tenant suitability. It will make sure you can hold the property for long enough, sell it when you want to, or if you need to, and ensure that any investment property that you purchase has the X factor, okay? I will also say, having said all of that, you're never going to find the perfect property, right? You might find a great area, but you are not going to find areas and property that tick every single box. There's no such thing as perfect. Having said all of that, okay? And I know that we're running out of time. So got some resources here. Watch this later on, guys, on, Katie and Terry put this up on YouTube. There are some great resources here. Obviously, the best resource that there is those hotspotting reports. The detail that you go to, Terry, to me is mind-blowing. I love them, love them, love them, have used them for many, many years. To me, they are second to none. There's also some other websites, of course, where you can get some basic stats. The local council websites, talk to local people. You know, nothing can beat doing that. Use professionals such as ourselves, obviously. And as always, we have our lovely Hotspotting $500 discount off our full standard property buyer service. If you've attended this webinar, if you have found the information useful, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram. Give me a call, send us an email. Have we got time for any questions? I tried to be quick.
You've done well, Kate, but I think we can spend 5 minutes or so on some of the questions that we have sitting in the chat box. Just leave that slide up there so people can see. Those of you who don't get your questions answered today, and some people want more than a single question answered, they want to have a conversation, please make contact with Kate at Adviseable. The contact details on the screen. Simon was asking a question, just a general question about whether you have a preference for older established properties over brand new sort of house and land packages or off the plan property. Do you have a leaning one way or the other, or is it a horses for courses situation?
I lean away from off the plan and brand new. I find that people often, they're too expensive basically. They're often in areas that are oversupplied. You have a lot of competition. The main issue I have with them is the overpaying for them. You pay a premium for them, and I just don't see why one should do that. The premium's often there because the property is being sold by a marketer that's earning a lot of money for doing that. If you do look at an off the plan or a brand new property, please do your research when it comes to market value, actual market value of what similar properties are selling for. I see people pay up to 100,000 over, too much for properties like that. So I don't like them. They're often not in established areas that have all the facilities and amenities that I like. I think it's better to buy, you know, if you're close to one of those developments, but absolutely buy a 1 or a 2-year-old property. You'll still get 38 years of fabulous depreciation on it. But these properties are often sold based on the fact that you're getting masses of write-offs, which makes the cash flow fabulous. But what they neglect to tell you is that you've overpaid for them and the area is not that great. So I prefer something established, which can be just 1 or 2 years old. I just want it built, and somebody else has had all the moving costs and the, the fixing costs. as bad as new as we go.
We've got a number of questions which around the general theme of, Melbourne is a bit of a case apart at the moment in terms of the COVID situation. People wondering what kind of impact that's going to have on the market there and on values. Do you have a view on that?
Well, it didn't have any effect first time around, so it's hard to see how it would affect things long term significantly because of the current cluster outbreaks. I don't see why. I don't see how it would. Again, it might slow market activity down a little bit, but we haven't seen values drop so far. I can't see why that would suddenly happen now.
A couple of questions. Phil asking a question about how you get that local information. It sounds to me like some of the things you're suggesting, that people have to do a bit of foot slogging, actually have to be in the area and walk around and talk to people.
Yeah, or pick up the phone, talk to people. The local area knowledge, obviously I visit everywhere that we're buying in because I'm buying for people. So when I'm assessing somebody's risk profile, I need to know the feel of a suburb. So that I can match suburbs and areas in general to a client's needs. So, but if you can't visit, you don't have to visit. I think buying sight unseen is perfectly acceptable as long as you've done all this research and you've picked up the phone and spoken to people locally who can give you this information. They will quite happily do that. Pick up the phone.
Okay. There's a number of questions that relate to the basic question of what it costs to tap into a service such as yours. I'm inclined to think that it's better if people have individual conversations with you about that. Perhaps drop you an email.
Our fees are all downloadable from the website. It's all there.
Okay. So there's this short. For those who asked that question, go to the adviseable.com.au website.
Wherever you've got it. Yeah, there.
But in some cases, it depends on, I think, what level of service you want, what you're actually looking for. It'd be a really good idea. Again, pick up the phone and call Kate. The number's there on the screen. Have a conversation about what your particular needs are, and you can get a little bit more tailored advice to your circumstances, perhaps. Okay, well, we're an hour and 10 minutes into it. Probably a good time to wrap up. There are other questions there that we don't have got time to get to, but please feel free to follow up by sending an email to Kate or giving her a call. You can also email me if you have some questions, ryder@hotspotting.com.au. And everybody who's registered for today's event will get a recording of the webinar event with the slideshow, obviously. So thanks, Kate, for a great presentation.
Sorry, I know, sped through, but a lot to cover.
Well, there is a lot to cover, and I think you've done it well. I always love doing webinars with you. We're of like mind in terms of our belief in the importance of research and the sort of things that are important. Just some takeaway things for me, the importance of understanding risk profile, which I think most investors probably don't. The importance of local know-how, that each area is different, and it's important to have some at-the-coalface knowledge of the area you're thinking of getting into. We made the point a number of times that the proximity to the CBD is increasingly irrelevant. There are more important things to be close to. And the fundamental importance of the local economy. It's not so much about what's happening out there in Australia. It's about what's happening at the street level locally with demographics, jobs. The local council, I think, is a point you made very well, Kate, the importance of the attitude of a local council. I find that increasingly. And but I think in summary, Kate, there's no shortcut for people. If you want to be successful with property investment, you've got to be prepared to put in some hours. You've got to do some foot slogging and do some work. There's no shortcuts. If you want to be successful, you've got to do some work.
You do, and it very much is short-term pain for long-term gain. Sorry to come out with a cliche, but that's what it is. That's what it is. There's work, but it will pay off. You do this right and you do it properly, it will pay off massively long-term.
A good point to end on. Thank you, Kate. Great presentation. Always
Pleasure.
enjoy doing webinars with you. And lots of feedback coming through in the chat boxes, people saying nice things about your presentation. and the quality of the information. And please do follow up with Kate if you've got further questions or perhaps want to make
watch it again so you can, you know, listen to my blurb more slowly. Yeah, watch it again.
Okay. And we will do it again in a few months' time, hopefully, because, yeah, great information and people are thirsty for it, particularly in times like these when there's so much uncertainty.
Yeah.
So thanks again, Kate, and thanks everybody for your participation, your questions, and your feedback on today's presentation. Terry Ryder from Hotspotting signing off. Bye for now. We'll do it again soon.
Stay safe.